Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Come il piano Easy Smart a canone zero, anziché a 3,90 € al mese. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.
Quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Come il piano Easy Smart a canone zero, anziché a 3,90 € al mese. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Rosanna. Grazie.
Al fuori.
Buonasera.
Good evening. As President of the Senate and the Chamber, everyone is here tonight. So yeah, I could say so. We will be talking about quite a difficult topic. I don't know whether it is more or less difficult than the fiscal reform, but it is a very complex topic, institutional reforms, because unluckily we had bilateral commissions, direct interventions, a referendum. So, well, we didn't achieve our goals. But at the moment, in spite of the fact that no reform was approved, at least we made people and citizens understand, and I'm talking on the basis of my TV experience, that institutional reforms are important. Now citizens know that these reforms are important. And I'm talking about common people. I'm not talking about people like you, experts. I'm talking about common people. And, well, common people now know something about this topic. They are more familiar with institutional reforms. So also for people who are not politicians. And I do believe this is an important aspect, because the same happened for taxation in Italy. It wasn't seen as a problem for a long time, but then from 1994, taxation became a central topic. Well, I'd now like to give the floor first I'd like to give the floor to Giorgio Vittadini, President of the Foundation for Subsidiarity, that will open this tonight's meeting, and then he will also make the closing speech. So please, a warm round of applause. You can do better than that.
Applausi si fanno alla fine perché magari può essere che
io
Well, maybe they're waiting for the end before really clapping hands. No, I like to feel the warmth of the audience. That's how I am. So, Giorgio Vittadini, President of the Foundation for Subsidiarity, you have the floor. Well, we have followed, the foundation has followed the intergroup, so I would like to be provocative. Then obviously our guests can express their opinions. So the main topics are differentiated autonomy and the direct election of the President of the Council. After I met so many representatives of the political world, I can say that this friendship is a need for unity, cohesion. The idea of a democracy, like during the Second Republic, is based on the sharing of fundamental themes, just like institutional reforms. Attempts were made during the Second Republic. Success was achieved in 2001, but that was it. So the first problem is that of a differentiated autonomy.
il problema delle deleghe.
So this is not just a problem of decentralization. From 2001 onward, there was a reform with exclusive and concurrent matters. After 20 years, we still have so many problems, and the COVID pandemic showed that this is a deeply rooted problem, which goes beyond the concept of decentralization. Do you think that we have a health service made up of 21 different health services, but at the same time, it is not possible for Rome to manage everything? So we should have something that has more authority, like in Germany, a place where this relationship between local administrations and government is better managed. So, well, the rate of young people in poverty has reached 14.2% in 10 years, and the educational capacity for families in southern Italy is €5 per day, 33% less than other regions. So we know that there are data that are different from one region to another. So there is a deep problem in terms of cohesion. Let's think about the opportunities Italy might have if diversification becomes an added value. And a few years ago, the foundation prepared a report that put the southern part of the country at the center, just like the times of Frederick II. So does it mean that we want to divide, or does it mean that we want to add value to all these different elements? The richer regions should help the poorer regions in a homogeneous way. And then another theme is that of horizontal subsidiarity, because we can simply transfer from Rome to Naples to Milan the center So we actually have different centers of powers, but the Article 31 of our Constitution talks about this, and we could actually open an era where this decentralization means cooperation. Years ago, we used to say more society and less state, but now I would say more society and more state. So we could think about a process of diversification that would encourage this bottom-up participation. Then there is another topic, that of the direct election of the President of the Council. But, well, we can discuss about this until tomorrow morning. We have to wait for President Mattarella anyway. So the second theme I propose is that of the direct election of the President of the Council. So, well, the countries who have these direct elections have a check and balance. We know, for instance, that the President of the United States can be someone who's not, so to speak, extremely strong. There has to be the possibility to have rules to have a cooperation. Recently, I've read the biography of the former Italian President Cossiga, and during the First Republic, we invented the regions and changed the parliament regulation. This kind of increase in power needs to be balanced.
Ed essendo da 20
And then a second theme, since there is this subsidiarity, I can say, what is the role of the parliament? Because I've loved this intergroup and the Italian model made of executive power, judicial power, and legislative power, because as Violante said once, a lot of laws were actually passed by parliament over time. This doesn't mean that government isn't important, but the parliament needs to be able to create laws that are shared, that are common, joint. And so this is the question. Many of you told me lately that this power has decreased. It's as if we had all the different powers, but this dialogue is no longer there, a dialogue that goes towards the common good. And I conclude with an example. The economic policy needs to be a financial policy. Yes, this is true, but we needed to think about the different characteristics in terms of local economies. We have to think that there are regions in the south that are rich. So this is the role that the parliament needs to play. So, well, I work as you work in a way, so this is going to be a success tonight.
Vi butto lì due frasi.
I'll give you some food for thought. So this is going to be my speech. One is a sentence, and then we have a question. It's a quotation by Calamandré, who participated in the drawing up of the Constitution. So it was really the pillar of this exercise, but you're all familiar with him. And he said, presidentialism as a condition of the system of parties. Parliamentarism is conditioned by the system of parties. So he actually described two problems that need to be balanced, one with the other, because presidentialism that actually impacts on the system of parties, if it is seen as a reform proposal like the Renzi-Boschi proposal. It can be shared and agreed with because it is well balanced. Another type of presidentialism could actually create some problems and would not be easily accepted because we have parliamentary tradition. Governments from the Magna Carta onward were created to limit the expenses of the sovereign. Nowadays, it is the sovereign, the government, that controls the expenses of the parliament, because the famous commissions are those railway stations where trains arrive full of people and leave empty. So this is another important aspect where the President of the Council has to play a role. So these are my thoughts that I want to share with you. Let's start with the differentiated autonomy. I think we couldn't have come up with a worst adjective, because it makes us think of a garbage disposal in a way. So he should be paying more attention to the words we choose. Anyway, let's say we like it. So you know that there are so many issues, as Giorgio Vittadini was saying. And since we are talking about differentiated autonomy, I'd like to start with Massimiliano Romeo, who is a group leader at the Senate for the Lega Salvini Premier, who's online. So I'd say you have 3 minutes each, so that we can also have a second round maybe, or a third one too. Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you. Thank you for the invitation. So, well, we can start by saying we are talking about a reform that was carried out in 2001, and it has not been implemented yet after 20 years. So we need to be more determined, more committed. We talk about new reforms as well, but if we do not implement those that we already agreed upon, I'm sorry, but what are the guidelines here? Well, the guidelines are the following. We have to put an end to the north-south juxtaposition. So this strategy to divide and rule doesn't work. Then the essential level of performance, because the reform by Calderoli identifies a minimum level to be granted to all citizens. And once this level is identified for each sector, it will be clear what the state has to transfer to the regions. And then the involvement of the parliament in the agreements between state and regions. This is an involvement that is done through a unified conference with the direct intervention of both chambers. And then another important element, I'm sorry, but how does it work according to you, this equalization fund? So there is the ordinary equalization that functions with the positive and negative residues, with those regions that spend more and those that spend less. 12 regions have a negative residue, 8 that have a positive residue. So this balance already happens, and just it's something that already works. But we also needed to talk about an equalization fund, an extraordinary equalization fund. We could use the cohesion funds that we did not use in 2014, in the period 2014 to 2020, at national and European level, and the programming period 21-27 in the 2014-2020 period. we still have 83 billions at our disposal. Only 33 billions were actually spent. But I'm sorry, could you tell me in 15 seconds when this equalization fund could be used to compensate those regions that have less and that find themselves in critical situations? Cohesion funds, well, 80% of the national one goes to the south, 70% of the European cohesion funds go to the south. The NPRR and the other billions we have that are not used because regions cannot find an agreement, that means that we do have the resources. We just need to use them in the right way. Okay, so you respected your allotted time, so you will be rewarded with a prize at the end. Francesco Boccia. A senator, even though he doesn't look like one, president of the group of the Democratic Party, Italia Democratica Progressista, and he's responsible for territorial autonomy and local bodies. So that, well, actually things have changed now. This is no longer my own responsibility. So I don't have any responsibility at the moment. I'm just a group leader within the Senate. This was the former mandate. So, well, this, the things Vittadini and Romeo said, what can you say about this? Well, the intellectual honesty of Vittadini is clear. Vittadini, and this is not a case, proposes two topics that do not agree one with the other: institutional reforms and differentiated autonomy. But there is a political exchange in the background, and this is what I want to discuss with my fellow politicians. We did not implement the paragraph 3 of Article 116. In 2001, I was a university professor, and I was against this reform because I don't think it was not carried out in the best way possible. That's why probably they failed. There was the government, the Berlusconi government, and then the Renzi government, but then the parliament did not accept them, and the country, the people, did not accept them, as the referendum showed. So today's majority should learn the lesson of the past 20 years, that constitutional reform of 2001 wanted to create new models of responsibility on the supply of public services to citizens. So the theme here is not the difference between North and South, but between more developed and less developed areas. Because there are in the South, there are very highly developed areas. I think about the city of Bari. So if I think about certain areas, also, for instance, some areas in Lombardy or in the mountains in Sicily and Sardinia, nobody talks about that. And if I think about the mountain area in Calabria, so there is a real problem of services, local transport, health service, schools. So I'm talking about all those services that actually should increase in line with the demographic characteristics of the regions. We live in a country where one-third of our provinces has more retired people than active people. And these are actually the areas that are the less rich in the country. So if we talk about differentiated autonomy without talking about the essential levels of services, well, this doesn't work. We want that the opposition asks that these levels of services need to be discussed by the Parliament and approved by the Parliament, and not ratified by a technical commission and approved by the government. Because when we talk about the equalization fund, and then I'll conclude, and then I will be talking about the institutional reforms. Romeo said there is an equalization fund, but there is no fund like that, because when we talk about equalization, which is part of the state balance, first of all, it doesn't work, and then it's not flexible. Every time you need to go back to the state region conference and renegotiate every single change. So we're talking about something else here. What we're saying is, if kindergartens need to be 33% in each Italian municipality, those municipalities that are backwards need resources. But where do we take these resources from? So the cost goes from 80 to 100 billions that need to go not to the south, but to the less developed areas of the country. That was very clear. Thank you for keeping your times.
I wanted to ask Stefano Patuanelli, Senator and President of the Cinque Stelle group. What do you think about this differentiated autonomy and about the proposal that was put forward? Thank you everyone. So let me first say what I think about the project of this government, because, you know, having listened to what my friend Massimiliano was saying, I'd say that the framework would be positive, but the reality is quite different from what he depicted. As Francesco has just said, there is no equalization fund. It hasn't been designed, it hasn't been included in the context of the Calderoli decree. And the same goes for other questions that are fundamental, other issues that are fundamental for differentiated autonomy, not to have a negative impact on the differences that already exist in the delivery of services in some areas. So there is no fund. Can you expand on this? He described the essential levels. He gave an example of kindergartens, for example. Any kind of services, infrastructures, healthcare, public transport, school education. They are all examples. And when we define the essential level of these services, and we understand that a region cannot achieve the essential level, should resources be given by the state, by the government? We would say yes. But how can we guarantee that a region receive those resources to guarantee a service? Sorry. But there's a risk. There's a risk because, you know, where can these regions find help? They should be helped by themselves. But there is a technical commission that will define the guidelines, and the Parliament will only be informed. As for the equalization fund, we have talked about it several times, but there is no guarantee about its existence, about its financing, because we need incredible resources. But the point here, in my opinion, is to understand the general framework that the government would like to propose. Because I see that there are several proposals in contradiction, from, you know, the direct election of the prime minister to the division and the secessionist idea. But if we want to have real innovative institutional reforms, we need to understand the framework. Sorry, just 1 second to give the floor back to Romeo. Let me ask you, does the Parliament plan to discuss about the equalization fund and the level of services? Yes, the Calderoli decree already includes this, and then we will discuss about it. And there are other themes. I mentioned the current ordinary fund, but we would like to have an extraordinary fund. So it is not true that we don't want to discuss about it in Parliament. Sorry for interrupting, but the time allotted is really little. Now, Maria Elena Boschi, group leader, the Chamber of Deputies for Italia Viva. She was also Minister for Reforms, and then there was a referendum. You already know the story. But let's get to the point. Good evening, everyone. Can I thank for inviting me? Then I will go straight to the point and get to the main topic. I think that these meetings and these sessions help me and us prepare the new plan. I'm just a member of Parliament. I'm group leader, and was just to underline my role for the sake of respect. Well, let me go straight to the point and be quick. Well, first of all, Italia Viva is in favor of differentiated autonomy. Then I'd rather talk about operational regionalism, which is an alternative to differentiated autonomy, which is a word that I don't like very much. And I think that the other option is more convincing. So we agree on that. And as for the Calderoli decree, well, in that case, we are not in favor because it is not fully convincing for us. We are not against talking about institutional reforms in Parliament, but this is not the way that is, let's say, the most convincing for us. In 2001, Francesco was a university professor and I was at university, so we are not responsible for the reform of that time. But I think that there were too many matters, too many themes, too many things, sorry, that were handed over to regions. And that was the first point. The second point is that the Parliament will have no role according to the Calderoli decree. Because in the Parliament, we can either say yes or no to what the Parliament agrees with regions. But I think that the Parliament should be central, should be core here. Also in choosing whether to, give these tasks and these competencies to the regions or not. I don't know if there will be modifications at the decree. In the decree, I am just referring to the decree that has been presented. But as Boccia and Patuanelli have already underlined, I think that there is not just a problem for the south of Italy, there is a problem for the whole country if this is the differentiated autonomy that we will have. I don't think that this will help the country because, having 21 different choices in the energy sector is not the right thing. It doesn't help. And it doesn't simplify bureaucracy, red tape, which is one of the main problems and the main issues. Moreover, every region might set its own limits on transport, on the transport of energy, and so on and so forth. And then there have been limits in the healthcare system. It was clear during the pandemic. But I think that the Calderoli decrees will accentuate these problems and not simplify or mitigate them. But as Vittadini was said earlier, in the reform of 2016, it was approved by the parliament, but then not approved by the referendum. We proposed a Senate of regions, so have representatives of the regions in the Senate for them to be part of the choices and have an organic reform. This is not included in the Calderoli decree. Another two important things are, well, resources, because we promised to have more euros, maybe a fund in the future, but it doesn't exist at the moment. And we should leave things as they are for regions in terms of competencies. And last but not least, differentiated autonomy is like, you know, a contract, a job contract that is deemed to be over in 10-year time. But this, in my opinion, creates problems, confusion, also for the government balance, because we need to be careful with public expenditure, and I think that that's the reason why the Calderoli decree should be modified in Parliament. Thank you. Now, Tommaso Foti, Fratelli d'Italia, group leader for the Chamber of Deputies. I hope I had your role right. Well, you know, it happened in history to make mistakes. My question is, do you think you will decide everything in the State Regions Conference and the point made by Maria Elena Boschi on the fact that there is an enormous, you know, problem relate to the competencies of every region? Sometimes the Constitutional Court is involved in deciding whether the topic lies within the competence of one region or not. But, you know, the Constitutional Court has underlined that these problems shouldn't be brought to the Constitutional Court, but to the Parliament. But do we have this kind of discussion or not, Mr. Foti? You know, I was the only one who voted against the 116 article, and I remember that the center-left party did. And there were 4 votes against. But then the reform was actually approved by the people, even if only few people went to vote for the referendum. Well, 20% of the Italian people agreed with the reform. In 2018, on the 28th of February, the president of the Emilia-Romagna region, Stefano Bonaccini, signed an agreement with Gentiloni and its government and Bressa, who was undersecretary, to implement the Article 116, paragraph 3 of the Constitution, talking about differentiated autonomy that the Constitution defined as different forms of autonomy. I don't think that at that time there was a draft law to implement this. And at that time, I think that they didn't say that there was a kind of autonomy that could become real only if the essential levels of services and performances were defined earlier. But after that, in addition to that, there is another aspect. The draft law identified a form of the president, the prime minister, and this form is related to an administrative act. And so, if it is an administrative act, we shouldn't keep it as it is, but make it a legislative act. And I think that the group leader of Fratelli d'Italia, this is not a change, I think. Wait a moment, because there was an amendment made by the group leader of Fratelli d'Italia and Italia Viva, and so it was something that should have been made by legislative decree, but in both cases, it was an opinion. Also, with this kind of decree, you are expressing an opinion, because the legislative decree corresponds to an opinion. And considering that I've been in this job for quite a long time, I remember that in some situations things went on for months. Also, when the main topic was personal freedom, because it's something of recent history. And so, if we want to find a balance, apart from the equalization fund, if we want to find a balance, because, you know, the parliament should be responsible for the equalization fund, not only because this fund needs to be voted in the parliament for it to exist. And all groups in parliament, no one excluded, well, all groups presented some amendments. What were you saying? Sorry. No, it was just a joke. We submitted some amendments, but we don't know if they will be accepted. Okay, now let's move to Nazario Pagano, Member of Parliament for Forza Italia, Berlusconi President and PPE, President of the first commission dealing with constitutional affairs. So let's listen to what he has to say. He will have to, in his commission, deal with this decree. Well, let me first thank you for the invitation to this very interesting debate. The Calderoli draft law on differentiated autonomy was by the government at the Senate. So, to make things clearer, they are already discussing, and some amendments have already been presented for this draft law, because it's not a decree. It comes from the government, and so it is right to explain what it actually is. There is Professor Violini here in the first row, and we would like to say hello to her. Being president of the first commission, and Maria Elena Boschi is a colleague of mine in my commission, we are already working on this, so the amendments have already been presented, but the voting will start in September. and Massimiliano Romeo can confirm that this is the actual situation. So I'm waiting, to see if things move on as they should at the Senate. It is clear that, as you said, Mr. Debbio, about the essential levels of services and the equalization fund. Well, you mentioned these two things that are the two main themes dealt with by the Parliament. And this is something that the Parliament should take into account while exerting its power. So there is no agreement between state and regions getting to the Parliament. What is the real situation? We need to lay the basis for the essential level of services. For example, as Tommaso Forti was saying, the choice of a legislative decree would change things a lot, because the legislative decree is one thing and the DPCM is another. Romeo has already mentioned that the equalization fund will be necessary, and I'm pleased to hear that, because I think that citizens do not like so much hearing about these things, but actually this is the basis for citizen services, because it includes transport and other things. So there are, 23 matters, 23 subjects to be entrusted to the regions for services to become more useful for citizens. This is the devolution. It's, handing down more powers to regions. Maybe 23 matters, 23 subjects are too many. I read an article where Minister Calderoli was saying, well, maybe the subjects should be only 15 and not 23. So considering the role that I have, and people know that I'm very proud of this role, and I know exactly what it means. But, reading what Mr. Calderoli said about moving from 23 to 15 subjects, it means that some of these subjects, of these matters, should be managed and dealt with by the government, by the state. And I'm convinced of that, too. Think of transport, of energy, and other issues. For example, we saw what happened during the pandemic at the healthcare system, so also health. Thank you. Now, let's give the floor to Maurizio Lupi. You all know him, and he's president of the Parliamentary Intergroup for subsidiarity, and he gave an incredible contribution to it. So, Maurizio, will we be able to, let me put it this way, no matter what we do, there will be someone who likes it more and someone who likes it less. But if you think of some principle in this process of differentiated autonomy, in your opinion, are we able to do that or not? Because, your position is quite free, so to say. What do you think of that? Well, first of all, let me say hello to everyone and thank you for the invitation. I think that what the other colleagues have said, have shown that here there can be dialogue, so with no biases, no prejudices, and when a draft law, once again, it's not a decree or anything else, it's a draft law, and so it must be analyzed and discussed by the parliament. And so what Boccia said earlier about the inequalities in our countries is true, and the inequalities are not only in the north and in the south or between the two, but in all of the country. And so, do things work? Do they or don't they? Do we really want to have this differentiated autonomy, or at least to try in the dialogue to find a new way? We have been mentioning LEPs several times. LEP, what is it? Well, we're talking about the possibility of building a new model in which the needs of citizens, social needs, civil needs, must be met in a more effective way for the freedom of every citizen to be expressed at best. So, millions of citizens voted in the referendum, some regions voted, and so we are responsible to take a step forward and not 10 steps back. Think of the, again, equalization fund, the parliamentarization. We are willing to work together and try to take up this challenge and make a change. And let us not forget two things. And I'm telling this both to the majority and opposition. If we're talking about services and the level of services, well, in the last 20 years, and with the constitutional reforms, I must say that I voted in favor of the constitutional reform because for the first time there was that principle of subsidiarity that was included, not only vertical but also horizontal subsidiarity. Horizontal subsidiarity is not a bad word. It means that all the third sector and the world that tries to meet the needs of citizens. How can we enhance the value of that third sector? With which resources? Because, you know, when the municipalities cannot meet the needs, they go to Caritas, they go to organizations, to the third sector. You know that very well because you worked in politics, and at that time you worked for the suburban areas of the city of Milan. And then there is another thing that I really like in this discussion, which is the theme of effectiveness and efficiency of public administration. Inequalities happen if local authorities, such as regions, are not effective. And so how can we organize ourselves? What can we do on this? I think that these are the main points that we have to deal with, and I think we have already set the time of in the future to deal with that. So.
Ora si va per votazione palese per alzata di mano.
So now we're voting by show of hand because the thing is simple here. I have to take a second round, but apart two people leaving the room, I think the others present think it is interesting. Good. So more enthusiasm then. Well, it's 8 o'clock in the evening, so this is an abstract topic. So do you want Do you go on until 8:30? Okay, let's do it then. No need to vote by show of hand. Let's go on until 8:30. So we have 30 minutes. So at the end we will have Giorgio Vittadini, 3 or 4 minutes. We have 26 minutes left. You have 3 minutes each, to be precise. Since you can see there is a timer above Romeo head. Yeah, we are playing a trick on you. Must be your idea, Maurizio. So a second round on the constitutional issue. And I'm not going to ask a precise question because the themes are so clear, so evident, that there is no need.
La necessità di un aggiornamento che prego di...
So there is a need to update the website of the Ministry of Institutional Reforms. So, because we needed to read something on the future. While preparing for this meeting, I went on the website and I didn't find anything on the future. But you must have your ideas on the future of these reforms. So, what are your ideas in terms of institutional reforms? I don't need to talk about the different opportunities, the different possibilities. You know already what I'm talking about. So, well, let's start with Massimiliano Romeo. I always call him Rosario. I don't know why. I'm sorry. You know that I've never made this mistake on TV. So, well, I've studied on the books by Rosario Romeo. So it's something that it's, always hovering above me. Someone who tells me stop saying silly things. So this is the question. But they told me, now I'm reading 2015 is the maximum time. I want to see Massimiliano Romeo. Here he is. Massimiliano, I repeat it, Massimiliano Romeo. So what is your opinion on institutional reforms? Well, we are in favor of the direct election with all the safeguards needed for the parliament. A constructive trust needs to be included. That is to say that the majority can only in certain cases decide to change the premier, but the premier needs to be the expression of an electoral result that the citizens actually have chosen. So the same majority could, in certain specific cases, resignation, for instance, but I'm sure that there are present, and I would like to give a word of thanks to Professor Violini. So what are the best forms to find this balance? This is something that we have to think about. Anyway, the Parliament needs to be safeguarded and involved in its fundamental role. Check and balance, then. Stefano Barnelli, what's your point of view? Well, Massimiliano touched upon a topic that we do like. We are in favor. This has always been a possible reform for us. The point is to understand the goal of this institutional reform. President Meloni started by listening to the opposition groups a few months ago, and what emerged was the majority wants to solve two elements. That is to say, the theme of governability, the duration of governments, whose limited time has an effect of in fact that at international level our governments are, so to speak, not seen as people with whom you can actually have a long-term dialogue because they change so quickly. So the first theme is this. Then the second theme is that the election result will lead to a majority governing the country, because what we saw, what we witnessed lately, an electoral result that wasn't really clear led to changes. And we have had some technical governments that had a very bad impact on the electorate. So we wanted to solve these problems by reversing some fundamental points of the Constitution, which is, well, foundation of our country, that identifies the powers of separate powers of the state, legislative, executive, and judicial power of the states, but the element of the direct election of the President of the Council, that is seen as someone elected directly by the people who, in some way, cannot be touched afterwards. So this is an element that, in a constitution like the Italian one, could change the force relationship, power relationship among the different powers. So these problems can be solved without changing the Constitution. So the constructive trust, it makes it very difficult for the government to fail. And with electoral rules, we can guarantee that the majority that wins the election can be represented adequately within the parliament. And also through simple touches to the parliamentary regulations, we can avoid inversion of trends among politicians. And another element, and then I'm concluding because I'm taking up too much time, is a rebalance between executive power and parliament by changing all the part concerns decrees and laws. So urgent decrease. This is also necessary, we believe, in order to give limits to this tool and to enable a wider involvement of the Parliament. Nazario, Pagano, what are the fundamental elements? I have to really ask you to be brief. Well, I am in favor of this because there is a need to be more authoritative at international level. So the duration of the government was really a negative element in terms of image of our government, because we have a president of the council that changes every time European leaders meet. So the first element is that of stability and of a figure that has a certain authority. When citizens who do not feel encouraged to vote finally go to vote, but then this makes citizens become closer to politics. So this is a valorization of the vote of our citizens as well. But this needs to be taken into account with other aspects. So the role of the President of the Republic, for instance. So the main figure is that of the head of government and no longer the President of the Republic. So we could have also the possibility to revoke the ministers or to end the work of the chambers. So there is a need to identify a balance of powers, and I hope that maybe this reform will be given to the to the chamber, because I think that the parliament will have to express itself on it. And there is another aspect. We often say within the parliament that the enormous amount of decrease, which is not a problem of this government alone, it's a problem that has concerned all the governments we had lately, needs to be limited. So the executive power should be stronger, the premier should be stronger, and this means to limit the possibility to issue these urgent decrees. So I think that all this can be done. We need to make our head of government stronger. We need to create a better balance of powers, and citizens will come closer to politics. And we have to rethink also the role of parliament, which can be done only by reducing the possibility for governments to issue urgent decrees. So yes, I understand that there are still so many pieces of the puzzle that have to be put together. Well, it's not easy to reform a state. No, I'm not telling it's your fault. I'm just telling that, well, it is a difficult theme. Francesco Boccia, what do you think? What's your opinion? Well, first of all, I hope that there won't be an exchange of requests. The Lega asks for the implementation of one paragraph of the Constitution before the European elections, one article actually. So I don't know where Forza and Lupi were in 2020, but in the State Region Conference, we unanimously reached an agreement with all kind of local bodies on a clear understanding, that is to say, the equalization fund with the money at your hand. But this is not present in Calderoni's proposal, because our friends from Fratelli d'Italia know what we are talking about, but obviously they need to defend their coalition. I have the feeling that they are tabling the institutional reform with a certain objective, because I would like to express my opinion, but I need to read this proposal first. When President Meloni summoned us, we asked what they had to say. We made our counter-proposals. 4 months went by, and we never heard back from them. So we would like to read this. The only requisite that we think we should impose is that the President of the Republic is untouchable. So, well, in this way, maybe we can find a common ground before even going to the constitutional reform we are all waiting for. We're not against it a priori, but we have tabled the need to change the electoral law. So there has to be a direct election mechanism. There are different patterns through which Italian people vote. I know what Forti will have to say afterwards, but I've always been clear in my opinion on this. But that was voted by PD and Lega, just to make you sure, to make you understand the kind of political picture we had at the moment. I didn't vote in favor anyway, but this is not the point. What I wanted to say, taking advantage of the kind of hospitality of Vittadini and the Rimini meeting, is that if this dialogue, so to speak, is developed on this common basis that is friendship, well, friendship calls for mutual loyalty between majority and opposition, but we don't have that yet. First, we need to have other milestones. We need to have a mutual respect and admiration. So we need to know that the majority is not playing a political game using reforms, because we have a suspicion there. Yes, I did understand what you wanted to say. It's quite clear what your point of view is. I could say that if you think that there is something hidden, maybe you yourself are hiding something. So, well, what I can say, a very normal reform, a law of the state. This is a constitutional reform with 4 passages from the Chamber and the Senate. So the time schedule will not be the same. We started, and you all know this, from the direct election of the head of state. Well, there are exchanges that can be carried out over time. I give you an egg today, you give me a chicken tomorrow. Anyway, since I have witnessed 2 reforms approved by the parliament, but that were then vetoed by the electors, well, Renzi, Boschi and Speroni, these were the reforms. So maybe it is better to ask our voters to vote for a reform that is beneficial to the national community. So now we have left aside the idea of the direct election of the President of the Republic, and we have asked for the direct election of the President of the Council of Ministers without touching the powers of the head of state. And here I have to add something on urgent decrees, because I have the impression that there is some confusion. In the First Republic, urgent decrees were much more numerous, but they were not implemented by the parliament, so there was no sentence by the Constitutional Court that went in that direction. So what is the problem of the parliament is that it is actually either it is implemented within 60 days, otherwise it cannot be implemented anymore. So it is important for our audience to know this, because this is the fact that there is also the intervention of the Constitutional Court. So why are we asking for the direct election of the President of the Council? Because on average in Italy, governments last 1 year. We have already changed 68 presidents of the Council, so this is not a very good image we're giving out. And I believe this is another important theme, another topic. We need to have a safeguard clause, because whereas the President of the Council could, I don't know, die, resign, or because he's tired to be President of the Council, but his majority needs to be able to go on. So in that case, maybe the Parliament could elect a President of the Council who is first and foremost voted by his own or her own majority, because otherwise you're actually doing something that is against the interest of the voters, because you elect a President of the Council who could be maybe the opponent during the electoral campaign of the previous one. So if we want to talk about balanced people, among balanced people who understand that all the constitutional reforms have failed, those that have to do with this government model, because this is the reasoning actually. So we just had the Title V with all the exceptions, because no one thinks that the matters that are given to the regions that could be confirmed today, starting from energy and big infrastructures. Yes, but this is something that the Constitutional Court has already reiterated many times. Well, dear Paolo, the Constitution today is something else. So, yes, this, in order to avoid new problems, I'd say we should limit the field of action and concentrate on an achievable goal, and then we have to take into account all the different effects.
Well, I will try to be very brief in order to leave time to Giorgio and Maria Elena. Let me just say one thing. In September, we will present a proposal from the majority, but beware, because I've been for over 20 years in the parliament, and as you see, every Sunday and every Thursday, you see that people are, less and less attached and affectionate to the world of politics. But defending democracy and institutions requires efficiency, requires the ability to do things, and at the same time, it also requires that the parliament and politics, so parties, are not informal, but are effective and can really represent the place for discussion and where interests are represented. So that's the need for reforms, and we want to take up responsibility. And I think it's right to focus on one issue and deal with it, in an all-encompassing way. I had 2 minutes, and there are 17 seconds left. But I want to underline that the figure of the President of the Republic as a guarantee should not be changed and touched. And I think that what we are doing here with the intergroup in the Parliament can really be a positive sign in this direction. And thank you once again, all of you. Thank you on my behalf. I would like to thank the meeting for inviting me to this debate that was not boring at all. There is also Maria Elena Boschi who has to talk. Yes, I know. Don't worry. Who do you think I am? Do your work, do your job, and I'll do mine.
Ma roba da male, ma fatevi i cacchi vostri.
Mind your own business. Maria Elena Boschi now, the floor is yours. Very quickly. President Pagano, if you want, at the Deputies, we can put forward our proposal, our draft law. So without waiting from Minister Casellati, we can put this proposal in Parliament, because this is the proposal that we used for the most recent elections, and it's the proposal that we have put forward for several years. We have not changed ideas. Some reforms were necessary when we were the majority, when we were the government, and we wanted to put them forward, and so we are still putting them forward. So we try to do it in the best interest of the country, and to keep the promise that we made to citizens. And then another important thing is to somehow give value to the vote of citizens, because, for many years we have chosen the mayors of the various towns and cities, and so this might be the case also for the Prime Minister, the President of the Council of Ministers, and so it is up to the people to make decisions. Otherwise, they will feel like, made fun of. And if we don't do this, they will always have a prime minister that is different from what they had been voting for. This means to remain within the parliamentary system with the figure of the President of the Republic and its powers that are still well defined. And will this solve all the problems? No, I don't think so, because then we will have also to change the system, the two-chamber system that we have had for several years, even if it doesn't exist anymore already. So thinking to avoid this problem is a mistake. So we should surely deal with that. And then the direct election of the president, of the prime minister, would also allow us to have a more long-lasting government, a more stable one, and maybe also to avoid what happened very often in the past and what, for example, happened in Spain these days, with people that vote, and then the government that is actually in place is different from what they voted. Moreover, we are not far from Forlì and from where Ruffilli was born, but I think that we need to somehow rethink the Constitution. But we have been waiting for 1 year, because 1 year has gone by from the elections, but the government hasn't done a lot on this. Mr. Pagano, a question for you, a 10-second question. When are you going to send us some papers to read? I think that we should change the electoral law. Okay, this is clear, because if we want to be closer to citizens and have them closer, this is necessary. I think that Minister Casellati is ready already. And it's up to the council minister, or to the government to decide. So now it's 8:25. We have been extremely precise, okay, and in time. Thank you, Paolo. Thank you very much for this debate, because once again it was like some, magic, because there are discussions at the meeting, but they don't end up fighting as in your program. And last year there was a dialogue, and this year too, and this is fundamental. Because I'm saying this on behalf of all the people. If you just listen to a dialogue, you can really understand. Because you can have friends with different ideas. This is the real backbone of the Italian democracy. So I would like everyone to thank you for this, for the discussion you've had. And then let me say 3 things and then make a draw a final conclusion. I voted for the 2001 reform because it introduced horizontal subsidiarity in the Constitution, as Maurizio was saying. Then the court went on. There was the law on the third sector. And thanks to the intergroup, other steps have been made. I think that we all agree on the fact that we are trying to make it grow farther. And if you think of this, you also have to think of making this kind of issue grow and develop, because this is something that joins us. What the Constitutional Court said, Article 31, well, demands something organic, some organic decisions between the regions. Because no one can make it on their own, and you have to remember this while thinking of the reform. And then second point, we want electors to be those, voters, to be those who decide. And this is something that should be defined. We can decide this for the European elections, and we need to decide something similar also in the national elections, because think of the third sector, entrepreneurs, those who get to parliament are well prepared. Some of them were in trade unions or were business people. And so we must be able to make this choice, to choose. So do it, because this is something that needs to be done for the present situation, and people deserve it. Third point, the role of Parliament. We need to go back to have laws created, made by the Parliament. The economic policy is, something that the Parliament has to decide, and there must be the consensus of everyone. We need to relaunch the role of commissions and the fact that a government can make laws, but the Parliament should go back to that primary role. And then we need to have a legislation to rethink most of the roles of regions, macro regions, the Senate, the Chamber of Deputies. And this needs to be made in a similar way to what happened in 1946-48, because at some point, after all these partial reforms, we need to get to a common point. It's 29 past 8. I give you 1 minute, the 1 minute which is left. Take advantage of that. Well, I think that I should say to people to be free on Thursday and on Saturday evening, and cancel all of your engagements if you have any. Now, well, because Dritto e Rovescio, my TV program, will happen twice this year, on Thursday and on Sunday. And so follow me if you want to. You can choose whatever you want and watch whatever you want, but remember that this will be useless instead if you watch me. But remember that you also have to change, the championship, the football championship program, because on Sunday evening there are important events happening. Okay, I'll think about it. Thank you everyone.
Grazie a voi.
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
quello che ti serve quando ti serve. Nasce Easy Bank, la nuova banca digitale di Intesa San Paolo. Easy Bank, semplicemente banca.
Il senso religioso o l'esperienza religiosa è innanzitutto un fatto, un fenomeno obiettivo, un fatto reale, non è un'idea, innanzitutto non è un modo di sentire, non solo si tratta di un fatto, di un avvenimento, ma del fatto più imponente e più inestirpabile della storia dell'uomo. Più imponente, più vasto, che neanche il fenomeno dell'amore dell'uomo e della donna, che neanche il fenomeno del rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perché il senso religioso è un avvenimento che pone, che afferma o che ricerca l'orizzonte entro il quale acquisti senso anche il rapporto tra l'uomo e la donna, anche il rapporto tra genitori e figli. Perciò è più vasto, perfino di quelli.
Dieci racconti di solidarietà e aiuto concreto. Storie ricche d'amore, riscatto, coraggio e cura. Storie di persone che donano e che ispirano a costruire una società inclusiva. Una mano a chi sostiene. Storie.